to the Howie Silbiger Show on the True Talk Radio Network. Get in on the conversation. Call 1-877-669-1292.
And good afternoon. Welcome to the Howie Silbiger Show right here on the True Talk Radio Network. My name is Howie Silbiger, and we are live, which means that you could call in. Numbers to call in everywhere, actually, everywhere. It's 1-877-669-1292. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. It's been a crazy week. Between local stuff, between international stuff, it's been an absolutely insane week. And because this week has been so insane, I felt that it would be appropriate. It would be very, very appropriate to bring in a guest, an expert who could kind of make sense of some of what's been happening, and kind of give us an indication of what we could expect in the next couple of weeks. He is an expert. He is an expert in security and an expert in politics. He is my political guru, as I like to call him. Our political guru. His name is Ryan Mauro, and he is the director of the Clarion Project. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's actually the Clarion Intelligence Network, so that my boss doesn't get mad at me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Section of Clarion Project.
I'm sorry. It used to be the Clarion Project, right?
It's Clarion Project, but I have my own section within Clarion Project.
Okay. So it's the Clarion Intelligence Network. That's what it says on the screen. That's what I really should have read, but you know.
Who reads?
Come on. It's overrated. Yeah. Ryan, we were watching. Wednesday was an insane day in the United States of America. The idea that normal people could go crazy and go run from a mostly peaceful protest. I love using that term because that's the term that was used all summer when they were burning down cities across the states. To go from a mostly peaceful protest to storming the Capitol building seems a little insane. How does something like that happen? I mean, this didn't just come out of nowhere. There has to be some kind of background to this.
Yeah, without wanting to sound overly philosophical, it always starts off with moral relativism. What was right and wrong becomes blurred because, hey, I really want to do something, or I really don't like the person, or I don't like what's happening. It always kind of starts there. If you stick to like what's right and wrong, and you know you're not going to cross into the wrong line, or at least you're going to avoid it as much as possible, you avoid radicalization. But it starts really with blurring that, but then it crosses into hysteria. Usually some type of belief in a global conspiracy, and that varies in some way. But all extremist groups have this idea that there's like a hidden puppet master, whether it's QAnon or the Islamists or Antifa saying that everyone's like a closet white supremacist, or the white supremacists saying the Jews are behind everything. It's always some version of that. And as you get into that, if you start believing everything's a global conspiracy or that everything's being puppeteered by someone, you naturally go into an echo chamber that you trust because you don't believe the media, the military, books, the media, like every source gets disqualified in your mind. So where do you go? You go to that specific message board on Reddit that you like, or that specific author, and it takes on this cultish gang-like philosophy. And that's when what is normally unbelievable suddenly becomes believable. And that's common to extremists across the board. And then you just kind of fill in those mental parking spots with the different variables to your liking. If you're a racist, you fill it in with some of that anti-Semitic propaganda. If you're someone who hates Democrats, you fill it in with some anti-Democrat memes. If you hate Republicans, you fill it with some anti-Republican memes. And that idea of hysteria, that we're on the edge of the apocalypse and you have the power to stop it, this is your moment in history, is what culminates in what you saw. And if you're thinking at this point, well, that's totally deranged and separate from me, not really. Most of these people are relatively normal when it starts. And I've got news for you. All of us, including me, have in some way contributed to this hyper-partisan, very inflammatory political environment. If we're honest with ourselves, we've all contributed to it.
Now, I'm seeing right now on the left, I'm seeing people like Michael Moore. I don't know if you saw his tweet today, where he was
Do I even want to know? Ugh.
yeah, he was calling it an inside job and saying that there were congressmen and senators from the Republican Party that were actually leading protesters through the building, and that this is all true, and that and that Trump and these senators and congressmen all set this whole thing up, and the whole idea was to usurp the government and to overthrow the Congress. I mean, it was a pretty long tweet. It was pretty long. Well, he put up on Twitter. It wasn't really a tweet. It was like one of these long diatribes. So when the Democrats and the left are complaining that the rhetoric on the right side was dangerous and hateful and incited riots and violence, wouldn't talk like this do the exact same thing on the left?
Yes, I remember Michael Moore back in the days when he was supporting the Iraqi terrorists killing our forces. So not much credibility in my mind, but he does have a big audience. And what he doesn't realize that while at the same time he's in some cases rightly lambasting Republican leaders for inciting this environment and the attack specifically. But what's he doing? He's doing the exact same thing. Because if you're saying that certain members of Congress led the attack, you're saying they're terrorists. Now, how do you treat terrorists?
Right.
A lot of people are going to say you beat them up, you arrest them,
Or
so
you shoot them.
or you shoot them. So it's not a big jump to assume someone who trusts Michael Moore acts upon those words and does the exact same thing that he's condemning. He's an idiot. He lacks self-awareness. It's just stunning to me.
It was shocking when I read it this afternoon. It was shocking. Somebody posted. I have a Facebook group, the Howie Silbiger Show group, and somebody posted up there, and I read it 3 times. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I had just finished watching like 2 hours of CNN because I like to watch CNN then Fox. I like to get like all the sides of the issue. And hearing hate fest on one side and hate fest on the other side is kind of fun too.
Right.
So I had just finished watching 2 hours of CNN where they were lambasting Trump and lambasting a couple of different senators and congressmen, saying that they were fully responsible for this insurgence and that they should be tried for sedition. I mean, it was an all out assault on the Republicans. And then I opened up my group, and there's this message from Michael Moore actually expressing the exact same sentiment that they're accusing the Republicans of expressing. And I'm like, what hypocrisy. Because nobody's going to condemn Michael Moore for this.
Oh, of course not. He's a darling right now, and it's just amazing to me how this all flips. Like you just switch the characters involved in the story. Antifa, mostly peaceful protests. Punch Nazis. Oh, it's somehow different. It's not different. The war that might have been sparked, and I use that word specifically because you might see a nationwide insurgency, not a civil war necessarily, but like you might see attacks in all 50 states over the next couple of weeks. I'm just being honest with you. It's not between us and the right-wing extremists or us against the left-wing extremists. Like it's against really all the extremists. And they are, I hate the terms right wing and left wing in this context because Antifa are anarchist communists who talk about basically killing the Democratic Party leaders. They're not Democrats. And the white supremacists, and there was a heavy white supremacist element involved in this specific attack. Not everybody in that rally, but in the attack itself that initially, breached and went in, heavy white supremacist element. Those people aren't reflective of the Republicans who they've openly said that they want to kill. It's all of us against them. And I hope that people understand that really patriotic truth because we have a lot of ground to stand together on right now. Everyone says we're more divided than ever. Not really. We are actually more united than ever at this moment. I don't know about ever, but ever in recent history, I think. As for the white supremacist element, just so people know that that's not hyperbole, if you look at the people who are being identified that were, in the heavy combat gear and really leading that attack, it's clear that they went there with a plan in place. It wasn't like a spontaneous riot. They went there with an operation. And the people that are being identified, Nick Fuentes, who's an anti-Semite, the guy from the traditionalist Workers' Party is pro-Hezbollah, pro-Putin, white supremacist. Other people being identified, like that guy with the zip ties, connected to neo-Nazi type groups. There's radical Oath Keepers elements. So it's becoming more and more clear this was a coalition of anti-government extremists, QAnon type extremists, and white supremacists. And that's important because of the Benghazi comparison in my mind. I mean, you know how the Obama administration was like, oh, well, that was a protest that got out of control and everyone mocked them. There's a lot of people describing that like that today. There is some truth that, in my opinion, that President Trump incited that, but the white supremacist elements that wanted to make that happen had that in mind before Trump said anything that day of the rally.
Now, the idea that Trump is a white supremacist has been floated around for years already, dating back to the misquote from the Charlottesville press conference, and that was purely a misquote. I mean, it was an intentional misquote, but it was a misquote. They cut out the end of the sentence, and I love when media does that because I see it a lot, where Trump will say something, and they'll lob off the end of the sentence. For instance, on Wednesday, at his speech on Wednesday, he says, "Now let's march down to the Capitol Hill. Now let's peacefully march down to Capitol Hill." And somehow the word "peacefully" had disappeared in all the clips, which I think is fascinating. That people would go out of their way to edit out key words that change the context of a sentence. Not new, by the way. This has happened for years, centuries actually in media. But to alter it to such an extent, and to play a narrative that Trump is a white supremacist, which I thought was ridiculous from day one. But it's a narrative that's played out, and a narrative that many millions of people believe.
See, again, that comes down to the destruction of nuance in our political environment, I think. Like, it's one thing to say you think he's weak on the issue of white supremacism, or his language attracts white supremacists. I don't think it's a conscious thing, but the fact is that there's a lot of white supremacists who hate him, by the way. I know because my team monitors these guys online, so I speak with some authority on this. A lot of them hate him. A lot of them liked him at first and started hating him. There's some who are somewhat pro him, not really 100%. And then there are some 100% pro-Trump extremists who aren't white supremacists. So there's some variety in there. But to say that makes him a white supremacist is ridiculous. There's a big gap between criticizing someone because you feel that their conduct assists an extremist cause versus saying they themselves are consciously a white supremacist. I will say, though, that I think the stand by and stand back comment, especially in the light of recent days, increasingly creepy to me.
Now, do you
doesn't make him a white supremacist?
Do you think that was? Do you think he said that intentionally, or do you think he was just so frustrated with that stupid question that they kept asking him? I mean, every time he got up at any press conference for 2 years, that's all they asked him was, "Do you condemn white supremacy?" And every time he said, "I condemn white supremacy, I condemn the KKK," and I mean, you can find 100 videos of him saying, "I condemn white supremacy, I condemn the KKK," and then they kept bringing the question up, and then they brought it up at the debate. Do you think he just said that out of annoyance, just like more of a piss off kind of answer, rather than a serious stand back and stand down? I don't think he was seriously telling these people that to stand by and and wait for orders. I don't think that was his intention there.
It was an odd answer. Is the problem is that it wasn't a natural, like when you're annoyed, you might say, give someone the finger or say that's ridiculous, or I've said it a million times. Stand back, stand by. It's just odd. It strikes me as purposeful, as reflecting some sort of thought process. Now, there's some analysis regard there, so I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure of that. But I can't escape from that, especially in light of what happened in DC and his lack of reaction, watching it on TV for like hours and not tweeting when seriously his tweet could have saved lives and he knew it.
Yeah.
And I have to put those two things together. They're just important data points that are just so related that I have to feel there's a connection there.
Even though his kids and his grandkids are Jewish?
Oh, it's not because he's a white supremacist. I don't think he was saying, "Oh, white supremacists stand by." I think he was thinking in his mind, the people that Joe Biden, whoever, are calling extremists in this question are my people. Not thinking, oh, they're white supremacists.
Right.
And so he's saying, stand back, stand by, because I don't know who Proud Boys are. I think he genuinely didn't know who they are. But he's thinking, I don't know who they are. I don't want to condemn them, but they're saying they're on my side. So I'm going to say stand back, stand by, rather than just outright condemning them. It was just, there was some thought process that gave that odd answer.
Now, my theory for years has been that since the passing of the Patriot Act after 9/11, America shifted their focus from white supremacy and homegrown terrorists to Muslim terrorists and the infiltration of Muslims, allowing white supremacist groups to grow and to recruit. Look, before that, they were pretty much dead. I mean, after Ruby Ridge and after all the raids that ATF did on the white supremacy groups, they were pretty much dead in the water. And then 9/11 happened, and suddenly the focus was shifted from homegrown terrorists and from white supremacists to Muslim terrorists, and the white supremacists were kind of left out in the cold. They were ignored, relatively ignored by the intelligence community, who had focused most, I think, the majority of their resources on Islamic terrorism. Do you think we're starting to see the results of those decisions 20 years later?
My assumption is yes, but I must say, in my interaction with the intelligence community and the law enforcement since 2002, there did remain a pretty significant focus on white supremacists, anti-government extremists. It was brought up all the time. I think it was easier to stop them. A smaller number of them who were radicalized would be willing to actually take action because they wanted to live to see tomorrow, whereas the Islamists want to die. So it becomes a lot harder to combat that. And the Islamists, in some ways, were easier to go after because a lot of them weren't American citizens or they were just residents. They stick out because they just stick out in a community where you have full of native-born white Christian Americans. And I understand why some people are upset at this, but the reality is that they stand out more, and Americans would know, oh, the word jihad is probably a bad indication of their intent if someone said it. So they became easier to spot, easier to get the approval for surveillance and investigations, easier to arrest. And so you saw a lot more activity publicly around that threat, whereas the white supremacist threat was still there and growing, but you hear less of it because they're less likely to do something, and the arrests of them are less likely to make news. So I think some of that had to do with perception. So they didn't go off the radar, like I'm hearing a lot of people say. But could more have been done? I would say yes, because of the international component to white supremacism, because these aren't just, they're born in America and homegrown that way, but they still have international connections, just like a homegrown Islamic radical, a guy born here, if he's loyal to Al-Qaeda, that's like an international connection. It's not an American thing. So I would say that more action was certainly needed on that. The political leadership needed to be more aware and sensitive about this problem and really how their language contributes. And that especially includes the left, not just the right, because all these extremists feed off of each other. So if you're soft on Antifa, you might think you're being tough on white supremacists, but really you're giving them a big Christmas present.
Right. How different is Antifa from, let's say, the white supremacist groups? I mean, radical groups
in my mind, they're not.
Radical groups are radical groups, and
the tactics are the same. They're both revolutionary. They both want to overthrow the U.S. government. They hate both political parties. They're bigoted in different ways, but they're still bigoted. They mirror each other. It's astonishing to me that I see this debate where some people defend one and condemn the other, and there's like a debate about which is worse. Like, screw them all. They are all enemies of the United States openly. You don't have to debate it. And you have to, in order to defeat one, you've got to take on them and the Islamists and all of them. It's a very frustrating debate.
How big are these groups? Are there a lot of people involved?
Unfortunately, yes. And both Antifa and the white supremacists and the really paranoid anti-government militia types, explosive growth. Like, we can't even keep up with it. We're a small operation, but everyone else I talk to in law enforcement and other groups that monitor these guys, no one can keep up with it. Sometimes you're finding the bad guy by luck of a draw. You have a pile of suspects that's growing every single day, and you're kind of just picking out which ones you want to go after. Or you glance at 10 of the 1,000 and you say, all right, I think these 10 look like they're the biggest threat, so let me invest my time that way. We are overmatched right now. The radicalization process is speeding up in multiple ways, both in terms of number and the degree to which people who are already radical are jumping towards acting on violent intentions. Both of those things are accelerating very, very quickly. And it scares living daylights out of me. Be prepared the next 2 weeks, and also be aware of your patriotic duty to report anyone contributing to this stuff. And don't contribute to the environment. Kindness has to rule again. It sounds corny, but seriously, that's like the common denominator to all of this. It's just the proliferation of hate and tribalism and just lack of kindness.
So with the Trump years behind us now, and Trump's quite light touch onto on these kind of groups, do you think anything's going to change in a Biden-Harris administration when it comes to crushing these kind of groups?
Yes, I think you're going to see some big changes actually, and on the positive side, I think you're going to see probably an incremental crackdown on the anti-government militias that are really extreme. I'm not talking about, your grandfathers who are like getting together to shoot guns and they call themselves a militia in case something bad were to happen. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the really organized types that seem to be craving the day that they can engage in violence and always saying martial law is around the corner. Let's prepare for war. And you can tell that they kind of want it to happen. In fact, I think some of that crackdown actually is already underway. I must say, under the Trump administration, you have seen an increase in prosecutions and investigations of white supremacists, particularly after the plot to kill the governor of Michigan. But leading up to that as well, the Trump administration was the first to designate a white supremacist group overseas as a foreign terrorist organization. They were there a long time. The Obama administration didn't designate them and sanction them. The Trump administration did. I still think it took them too long, but nonetheless, they were the first to do it, and they didn't have to do it. So they deserve credit on that level. Under Biden, I think you'll see, a tougher approach on white supremacy, and that's partially forced by events, so that's naturally going to happen. I'm concerned about the approach on Antifa. The Antifa operatives that we monitor, they want to go to war with Biden. To them, that's going to prove their authenticity. So they're not foot soldiers of the Democratic Party. They're saying they want to prove that they are not by going to war with Biden and police forces under the Biden administration. How he handles that, if it's appeasement, then you're going to see Antifa's ranks double overnight. If he confronts them, you're going to see their ranks cut down significantly. So that's going to be a really important moment to wait for. In the realm of Islamist extremism, I'm concerned about because we saw what happened under the Obama administration where you had Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas-linked groups being consulted with. I don't want to say being protected, but there was a lax policy on them. And that's bad from the perspective of countering Islamic terror as well as white supremacy terror that sees that and then uses that to recruit. So I'm envisioning a mixed bag. I'm hoping that unlike the Obama administration, that if they bring in Muslim Brotherhood linked groups and their politicians start really working with them and having them advise them on policy, that when that gets called out, they'll hear it and change course. But I'm also trying to be optimistic.
Now, these groups, do they actually pay attention to what's going on in government? I mean, are they cognizant of the changes and the nuances of government and the nuances of different leadership? Or are they just
nuances? Absolutely not. Like for the so-called right-wing extremists, I just hate right-wing, left-wing, but the right-wing extremists, like they'll point to a single Jew in the Department of Homeland Security and say, "See, the Jews run the Department of Homeland Security." If you look at on forums like Reddit, or there's still Instagram pages that are like white supremacist friendly. It's a game of spot the Jew. Like where they literally, you'd look at a news article, they try to identify people with Jewish sounding last names and they highlight them, and then that's their post as if they're doing like genius investigative work. So no, there's not going to be nuance from these guys. But they do pay attention to the news. They are obsessed with the news. It kind of becomes their world. It becomes what they and their online friends, because a lot of them don't have friends in real life, are talking about. So their form of socializing is talking about the news, which is should never consume anyone 24/7,
Right.
much less someone like that. And so yeah, I mean they're news junkies, but they're not good news analysts.
Right. And the conspiracy theories don't help the cause either. I'm sure.
Right. Right.
How dangerous are we going into? How dangerous is the period we're going into now? Are we going to? Is the world getting more dangerous or less dangerous? Because we keep hearing that now that the Democrats are there, they're going to save the world. The Messiah has arrived. But
Right.
but is that the truth? Is that really going to happen?
No, because I mean, I was actually saying in recent years that I felt that things were getting safer. And there were some bad trends, but overall the good trends were outweighing the bad trends. Right now, I am more optimistic about the Middle East than I am about the United States.
Wow.
And that's saying something.
Seriously.
Uh, so, yeah, I'm really terrified. And I, like a lot of other people, really did say that what happened in DC was kind of going to happen. That there would be an attack on the government by these types of extremists, because they're openly talking about it. It didn't involve any genius on my part. But if you pay attention to stuff, like we knew this was coming months ahead of time, which is why I'm so stunned at the lack of security at that event. Just absolutely stunning.
Yeah. Why do you think that was? That they didn't have enough security? I know that when last time I was in Washington, was right after that guy tried jumping over the fence to the White House to get at Trump. So the guy climbed the fence, he jumped over the fence, and they put barriers up in front of the fence.
Right.
So they had a 5 foot buffer zone between the fence and the public, with barriers separating the area. And I was there with a group of people, and I stepped into the buffer zone. I was taking a picture or something. I stepped into the buffer zone, and Secret Service was on me almost immediately. I mean, it took less than 30 seconds, and I had 5 Secret Service guys there pushing me away and questioning me on why I was behind the buffer, why I was in the buffer zone. So I said, security was that tight around the White House for the simple crime of a guy jumping over. Here you have 100,000 people standing in the street, and they're yelling, this election was stolen from us. Let's go to the Congress. I mean, you figure security would be pretty tight, no?
Yeah. I mean, it's worse than the mistakes that led to 9/11. Not because I'm saying this event's on par with 9/11, but the stupidity is just that mind-boggling. At least in 9/11, there was some stupidity and lack of foresight, but there were bureaucratic problems. Like there's nothing you can blame it on except for just sheer ignorance and stupidity. They could have made one phone call to me months ago and been like, "Hey, what's a day or a time period that you're concerned about?" And I'd be like, I would say the month or a few weeks leading up to Biden's inauguration, like anyone else would have said. There's no words. I mean, it's just unbelievable that happened. Um, yeah, I wish I had a better, more substantive answer, but it's just that it's that bad. It's just that bad of a mistake.
It's completely mind-boggling. I was watching it live, and I was just like, where's the National Guard? Where's security? I mean, within a block of the Capitol, you have 5 police forces within a block of the Capitol building. You have the FBI, you have the CIA, you have you have you have the ATF guys. I mean, they're all within a block. One simple phone call. I mean, all of them could have come down to the Capitol building immediately with their SWAT teams. They all have separate SWAT teams. I mean, it could have been easy to clear out that building within 15 minutes of them walking in. Yet the whole thing lasted like 5 hours. So I just don't get it.
I know.
I mean,
Like
it's just so weird.
it's hard to have confidence in anything after that. It should have been the most predictable thing in the universe.
Yeah.
Even the intelligence flow. I mean, I know some of those white supremacists that were involved in there. I've reported them to law enforcement, as I'm sure other people have. So you know that there was intel that these guys were headed to DC to do something. Like how could there be minimal security like that? It is just unbelievable to me. And the consequences of this, I don't know why some people are minimizing this, and you they don't get how close we came to a true disaster. I mean, that was an emergency and it was a disaster, but I mean, like, congressmen and senators just being massacred because these people came with weapons. A lot of them apparently had training, you would assume, based on their ideology, openly saying they were going to execute these guys. And you see the one video where the black cop is facing down some of these people, and man, is he brave. He's getting faced by this crowd of people, and you're noticing he's not fighting. He's actually not striking them. He's also not retreating. And it's kind of a weird video when you first watch it. And now people have looked at it, and he was very bravely and intelligently keeping the confrontation going, but walking backwards to lead them towards the stairs away from the doors into where the senators were.
Right, he led them all the way up the stairs. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were right there at the door.
Yeah.
Like right there. And they followed him because people just follow the person that's in front of them. And it worked. So the position that we're in right now, as scary as it is, like we were that close to it being many, many times worse. You might have had live executions on TV.
Wow, that would have been crazy. I mean,
Crazy
that would have been
became
third world country crazy, not in America crazy. Third world country crazy. This stuff happens in banana republics. That doesn't happen in the United States.
We're kind of in third world crazy right now. I hate to tell you.
Yeah,
this is stuff that shouldn't be happening in America, but like just even a few years ago, like probably wouldn't be possible. And what's really frightening is that when you look at the different white supremacist and extremist groups that were involved, because again, this wasn't just like a random collection of weirdos. They came from across the country. Now, many extremists wouldn't go to DC because they lack the money, they couldn't get off from work, maybe too lazy, or were worried that they would get caught because it's just such a predictable thing. If I'm an extremist wanting to do something real bad, and like that's not where I would go, especially if I thought that I was being tailed. So what are the networks back in these people's home states going to do over the next couple of weeks? That's scary. And what we're seeing from the intelligence that we're getting and what we're monitoring is that there's memes and ads going around about rallies in state capitals, all 50 states, in the days leading up to Biden becoming president. So everyone needs to pay attention to where rallies are happening in state capitals, and pay attention to your Facebook friends and whatever, and see who's involved and see if there's evidence that they're planning something, because this could be really bad.
Yeah, seriously, it's kind of scary. Now, now, what about the censorship that we're starting to see against conservatives, conservatives in general, not only high-profile conservatives, but conservatives in general? It seems like Facebook, Twitter, and by extension Instagram and Periscope and all the other side companies that these companies own have been shutting down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conservative members' profiles, pages, or accounts. I don't think I've seen this kind of censorship in America ever before. Do these companies have too much power to control the dialogue? Too much power to control the narrative? Or do you think that they're justified in shutting this stuff down?
My initial impulse to this stuff is always to say, well, let a business do what they want, and then a better competitor will come on and conquer them. But these companies are arguably utilities at this point. I mean, they're part of people's daily lives. You have very little influence over them. It's almost like, the power company. Yeah, I guess you could, these are essential services, essentially, for operating, for businesses and stuff. So I think some regulation is certainly necessary. I understand why Twitter did what they did, because if you're sitting there and you're worried about even being sued or just, bad PR, if the president says something in this type of environment, intentionally or unintentionally, it can get people killed with the way things are right now. And Trump isn't always careful with his words and his tweets.
But it seems kind of hypocritical, if I could use that word, when they allow Khomeini out of Iran to be tweeting about annihilating the Zionist state, and that seems to be okay. but it's not okay for Trump to tweet that that the election was stolen from him. So I'm kind
Yeah.
of torn between watching Twitter get rid of American conservative voices, but allowing dictators to still air their grievances against their imaginary grievances against other diplomatic countries that they want to kill. So it just seems kind of hypocritical to me and kind of one-sided and maybe a little
Oh, it
bit.
is. I mean, they think about how eventually they got good at it, shutting down the ISIS guys on Twitter. I used to, for fun, talk to ISIS on Twitter.
Right.
And obviously I've reported to law enforcement and stuff, but it was fun for me to, be immature and mess with them and have them mess with me back, calling me an a-hole and different things like that. Like that is partially how I dealt with the stress of the threat. But they justifiably said, look, we're at war with these guys. Let's crush their accounts. And it was effective. Just like bombing radio stations and lines of communication when you're at war with the enemy makes sense. You say, well, at that point, freedom of speech doesn't matter because we're at war with this group. You arguably are at war with the Iranian regime. That's obviously what I think. The terrorist groups that they sponsor, yet somehow they're doing things only marginally different in style from ISIS, and they somehow have free reign. And then you shut down the president of the United States. Now, to be clear, I wouldn't shut down Trump from Twitter. I'm just saying I understand the predicament. Just think a little bit. Like what I would have done if I was that concerned, I'm at Twitter, is say, all right, people who are putting out tweets like that, including the president, we're not going to censor you, but there's going to be a delay, and it's going to come through a filter. And if there's something inciting violence, we're not going to allow it to be posted. Now, people would still be upset at that, but I understand in a certain environment, a certain context, if you feel like you have to do something, that makes more sense than saying we're going to take away your voice. And by the way, cancel culture and doing things like that, big gift to the extremist cause. Don't think that you're hurting the extremist cause by doing that, because their narrative that to spur themselves to action is say your freedom is being taken away. We're now at that point where there's no coming back unless you engage in violence. And they always talked about the white supremacists, the type of people that carried out that attack in DC. Soon you're not going to have a voice on the internet. They're going to take that all away. And the reason I say this is because there's a lot of truth to it. And now that this happens, Parler goes down, which I may not be a fan of, but still, you take down Parler, you take down the president and other people from Twitter, their prophecies are coming true. You just helped radicalize them. And you further pushed them into an echo chamber. So they're not on Twitter and Facebook where other people can challenge their ideas or where people like me can spot them more easily. They're going to go into their own encrypted chats. It just got a lot worse. There's going to be a Parler competitor or something else, whatever it is, a smaller communication cell that becomes larger, much more difficult to detect and monitor. This wasn't good for national security. It wasn't good for Twitter. It wasn't good for anything. It just has very poorly thought out, and it's dangerous for all of us. The precedent that it sets. So I'm really quite upset about it.
So why do you think they did it? I'm sure the great minds at Twitter and at Facebook could analyze the situation the same way you did. Why do you think they did it? I mean, they built these
I do think they lack common
billion-dollar
sense.
companies. So I mean, they're not dummies. These people have a little bit of brains. I wouldn't say a lot of brains, but a little bit of brains. They had to have seen that this is not good for them, not good for the country, not good for anything. Why do you think they went about and did this?
My guess is that there wasn't a lot of brainstorming into it, because I actually haven't, this idea of delaying tweets from certain people for review, I haven't seen that idea out there. To me, it seems like common sense. It didn't involve a lot of thought on my part, but I haven't seen that idea out there. So it's very possible that just like how the lack of security in DC is so stupid it doesn't make any sense, I wouldn't put it past Twitter and the tech giants to do something stupid that doesn't make a lot of sense when really you could have come up with an alternative idea. So I wouldn't put that past them, but also, of course, there's a pretext. I mean, there are a lot of left wingers out there that cancel culture is a way of implementing Antifa's goals. I mean, Antifa wants to make it impossible for conservatives to operate in civil society. And doing things like this is a goal of Antifa, to pressure companies to make it impossible for you to exercise your freedoms. That their own manuals talk about things like this. So I think there's an ideological element, somewhat of a pretext. It's really all of that, and never underestimate the, I don't want to say keep saying stupidity, but all right, whatever. We'll say stupidity. I'm looking for a better word, of the left. I mean, in terms of messaging and strategy, and I'm not talking as a right winger. I'm politically independent who votes for both parties. But I think any objective observer would have to look at the left and say their messaging and strategy is so terrible that it's hard to fathom. Think of politically the position they're in, right? Like this rare moment where almost everyone's criticizing Trump. The optics are terrible. Everyone's concerned about a threat. They've been, to their credit, warning about the rise of white supremacism and this type of extremism, and things like the type of dialogue and tweets that we do get from leaders like Trump that's increasingly inflammatory. Like, they couldn't have had a better moment politically. You would think they would say to themselves, keep the attention on this. It's working for us. We want to solve these problems. And then what do? Well, Twitter shuts down Trump. Parler gets, basically destroyed. And now everyone's talking about that. It's just unbelievable to me. Like that no one thought to themselves and said, just even politically, this is self-damaging and one of the dumbest things that we could do right now. And there they did it.
Yeah, and I put the Democratic Party into that category too. Throwing out the idea of impeaching a president 11 days before the end of the presidency seems a little ridiculous to me. Just to me, it seems a little ridiculous, knowing the process of going through impeachment. I mean, we've seen the process. We saw it last year, the first time they impeached this president, right? So looking at that process, I mean, in 11 days, it seems a little odd, especially since the Senate said, "Look, we're not prepared to hear it until the 19th." So I mean, impeaching the president after the fact, it's kind of dumb. So why put yourself through? Why put yourself through these optics?
Law. Yeah, I'm not enough of a constitutional law scholar to know, like, apparently there's some plan to speed this through, but I can't tell you whether it's constitutional or not or how that's going to play out. For me, I must say, and I know I'm going to get backlash for this, but I owe it to people to be as truthful as possible and not pander. If it was me, I would vote to impeach for inciting the insurrection and for particularly the response after it started, because you can make the argument he didn't intend for it to happen. I still kind of doubt that that's the truth, but you can make the argument, and you don't want to, punish someone unless you're positive that that's the case. But after it happened and he's reportedly watching TV and there was plenty of time to respond and he didn't, and reportedly still hasn't talked to Pence, didn't check in on his safety. Like there's enough there that for me, if I was in Congress, I would feel morally compelled to impeach, even if it wouldn't result in a conviction or anything like that.
But do you think there's a point in
they shouldn't get people's hopes up that hey, this is going to happen and result in a conviction?
Look,
because like you said, we have no time. Like
Dan Crenshaw was on one of the networks, and he made an excellent point. His point was that politicians are responsible. It wasn't only Trump responsible for this. Politicians in general are responsible for this. They keep making these promises and these crazy promises to the population that they know they can't keep. He says so. Trump was making this promise that Pence would overturn the results and the election was stolen from him, and that the election results would be overturned. So naturally, you're going to have people who are upset about that, who are going to take it out in some ways. Some people are a little crazier than others, and when they get a little upset, they take it out different ways than normal people do. And he says, and now the Democrats are doing the exact same thing, saying we're going to impeach Trump 11 days before the presidency ends, and they know they can't do it. It's not going to happen. The Senate is not going to impeach Trump before, and they're not going to remove him from office before the end of his presidency. So building up these expectations puts the blame on the shoulders of the politicians, as well as the person who's inciting. Let's say Trump was guilty of inciting and pushing the crazies to go and do what they did. But the whole concept, the whole atmosphere of politicians making these crazy promises, and this has happened throughout the entire Trump administration, both on the right and the left, that they've made these insane promises that they knew would never happen. politically it was impossible for it to happen, but they made the promises anyway, building up the hopes of people who were a little desperate, who whatever, um, and then radically disappointing them, causing this kind of violence, this kind of upset. I thought that was an excellent point.
It's excellent. I could see where if you're a totally self-absorbed politician, you're thinking, well, at the end of the day, they have to choose me or the other guy, and I just need to be able to make the point that the reason I couldn't fulfill the promise is because the other guy's party. If you're a total immoral person, like, yeah, I can see where you could justify that. But what happens is that builds that anger. It does fuel the extremism, because then people start saying, well, the system must be failing. Maybe the system is wrong. All these extremists have an idea in mind for replacing the government, replacing the idea of America. They're not pro-American, they're anti-American. Even some of those that claim to be patriotic, they actually aren't, because they're talking about reshaping it, breaking up America into a white America, some of them, or bring it back to, in their mind, the glory days from hundreds of years ago. You're talking about destroying America as we know it. Right. And a lot of that comes from repeated disappointment and saying, well, the system obviously doesn't work, so I need to find a new ideology. And so when you make these false promises, when a politician does that and you fail to fulfill them, you're fueling that idea that the system has failed, it's time to move on and replace what we believe in with something new. So it really is very dangerous. Maybe you have a better answer to a question in my mind than I have, because I don't know the mechanics of the Republican Party leadership. But is there a way to censure Trump? Because I feel like it would even be healthy for the Republican Party to say they at least gave him a slap on the wrist.
Well,
I was reading about how the Arizona Republican Party apparently wants to censure Cindy McCain. So, come on. Look,
the Senate and the Congress have the right to censure. They don't have to impeach. They could censure the president.
And what about the Republican Party, though?
The Republican Party, of course, could do it too. The GOP could censure any of their members. So each party has the right to censure, but the Congress itself and the Senate itself has the right to censure. So if they don't like something the president did or something the president said, they have the right to slap the president on the wrist and say, hey, listen, what you did wasn't completely impeachable. We can't prove impeachment on this, but you're a bad boy, right? They could do that. They choose not to with Trump because they want to hold a heavy stick with Trump, but that's the possibility. Look, Obama was censured by Congress, and Clinton
by a Republican-led Congress.
That's right. And Clinton was censured before he was impeached. He was censured. So I mean, there's a precedent of Congress and the Senate doing that. This Congress and this Senate, this past Congress and the past Senate, not the new one, the old ones, chose not to deal with Trump that way. And maybe it's because of Trump's unconventional way of dealing with politics, or maybe it's because they just hated him so much that that everything had to be extremist. But this was the way they decided to treat Trump.
Do you think the Republican Party should do that? Like, especially if they control the Senate, I think it would be important for the Republicans to say that
we disagreed with that.
Something in response to this,
Yeah, I mean, not everything requires the removal of the president. So even the president's phone call that he got impeached on last year, I don't think that required the removal of the president. They could have said, "Look, that was an unethical thing that you did, and shame on you." And look, now it's on your official record that you did this, and we censured you for it. But to go through an official impeachment, I mean, that should be reserved for major crimes, like stuff that's just inexcusable altogether. I mean, you look at it and you're just disgusted by what the guy did. So that's really what impeachment should be, and I think that's what impeachment was originally intended for.
And you have to have a reasonable chance of conviction. Otherwise,
right.
you're taking time that could go to something else. So for me, like, even if I'm supporting impeachment, but I'm not going to, I might support morally, but I wouldn't support taking that action if there's no chance of it working, because there's only so much time in the day and there's a lot of people hurting for different reasons.
Right. And the Senate will be tied up for weeks and weeks and weeks dealing with the impeachment trial, as they were tied up for almost 2 months dealing with the impeachment trial last year, which means that they weren't passing legislation and doing stuff to help the American people. So everything got put on hold.
That was another really dumb, strategic mistake. And with messaging, it's just, I mean, you go on and on where I know some people, and I'm saying this as an independent, but like a lot of my conservative friends sometimes will like to play up that the left is so good at messaging and strategy to excuse their own shortcomings. I got news for you. No, they're like they're really unbelievably terrible with strategy and messaging. Like don't say that they play the game better than you, because they do not.
We got a Facebook message from Dino. Dino says, "What is happening in the U.S. as concerns the lack of freedom of expression is incredibly frightening. That the Ayatollah and the Communist Party of China can remain uncensored on Twitter, and the President of the United States is banned and is absolutely ludicrous and dangerous." I have to agree with him. I think he's 100% right.
Yeah, did you see the tweet where the Chinese Communist regime embassy in the United States put out a tweet describing their concentration camps of Muslims as basically re-education classes for women's rights?
Right, yeah.
And I didn't see any of those markings that Twitter puts on saying like, "Oh, this is disputed or not confirmed."
It's amazing. It's amazing, but everything that Trump tweeted or posted, that was disputed, or it's absolutely crazy.
Whitewashing concentration camps somehow gets through the filter.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, mass murder is A-okay with Twitter.
Yeah,
it's so ludicrous, and I think I'm starting to see. I mean, I didn't see it before because I really didn't care all that much about these major tech companies. They were useful. Look, we're broadcasting not only on my own personal stream, but we're also broadcasting on Facebook and on Twitter and on all these these mega sites, right? So I always used them as a tool. I never really looked at their influence on anything. It was just a tool to get the message out to everybody. So this was an easy way to broadcast to to a few hundred people who watch on Facebook, the few thousand people who watch on Twitter. It's just a tool to build audience. In my mind, that's what Facebook and Twitter and everything was. I never put anything personal on here. I never do anything personal on any social media. It's all about the show and all about the politics and all about having the discussion. And then I started this Facebook group, the Howie Silbiger Show group, and it was basically to have political discussions. I didn't want to do it on my personal page anymore. I moved all the politics over to the group, and some of the people on my personal page were getting a little annoyed with constant fighting on the page, so we moved it on to a group, and went into the group, and I started noticing suddenly that Facebook was starting to send me messages. This article that was posted by this member is factually incorrect, or this article that was posted by this member is fake news, or this is this, and I started looking at it. I would go to each post because I was curious. It was more a curiosity thing. I don't care if I erased a post; it doesn't matter to me. Like, erase it, who cares, right? But I went to the post to see what they were marking as not factual, and some of them were opinion pieces. And I'm thinking, wait a second, you're fact checking opinions? How does that work? How do you fact check opinions? and they were opinion pieces, or they were news articles from like legitimate news sources, like Associated Press. And I'd be like, okay, you're fact checking Associated Press, but Associated Press is the fact checkers. So the Associated Press is saying that they were wrong. I was just so totally confused by it.
And they made such a mistake. All these social media, by ever entering the area of like, hey, we're a publisher responsible for the content. Like, if I'm making a phone call to someone and I'm using Verizon's not responsible for the content of my phone call or my text message, my group text, or any of that. And that's understood. Social media is like the modern version of that. And somehow, just through pressure, and I thought the pressure was misplaced, saying, oh, well, they need to start editing stuff. Like, no. I'm kind of understand if you report a post, maybe taking it down, but even then I could see a strong argument saying not to. It's just like they're not responsible for that. If someone wants to have a fact checker for their posts, a company like AP can make a lot of money by selling an app or something that then interacts with your posts and can rate them or screen them or whatever. But instead, Facebook and Twitter and all these places decided to act like newspaper editors, and now it's a different ball game. They're open to now different regulation as a publisher versus just being a platform or like a utility. just a tremendous mistake, and the damage it's done is incalculable.
No, I kind of miss the old Facebook, where
Yeah.
where I could post something or somebody could post something, and then suddenly and then we could have an honest political debate about it. We could talk about it, and we could discuss the issue. I mean, we could disagree with each other, but we could actually have a conversation. You can't have political conversations anymore anywhere. It's
Yeah, the
impossible to
big
have political
sinful thing that
conversations.
both Twitter and Facebook also did, and all these measures they're taking to fight extremism pale in comparison to this mistake that they did, that they can reverse, and they are not,
Right.
which is the algorithms that spit back at you more of what you like. Like, I loved Facebook where I would go on there, and I don't know who posted 3 minutes before me. It might be some kid from high school, and that's how I kept tabs on lots of people without actually having to talk to them, but I still felt like I had a relationship there because it was just kind of random, that was it. And then over time, as those algorithms got smarter and smarter, it started spitting back, so you start seeing the same 10 people over and over again. Now you apply that to news, now you have an extremist echo chamber,
Right.
because if you start liking all of one type of post, it spits it back at you. And I've seen extremist propaganda spread that way. So you start liking, this is an extreme example, ISIS material, all of a sudden Facebook's now recommending and pushing ISIS material towards you, and you start doing the work for them. That's how the algorithm works, and it is a threat to our society, from national security, mental health, the health of our civil society. If there's one thing I would do to help fix this country, I would ban these places from having that algorithm, because it poisons us on so many different levels.
Yeah, I agree with you. I remember years ago, before Google bought YouTube, I was at a trade show, and I ran into a guy, and his job was to put the videos on the front page of YouTube. So when you went to YouTube and they had all those videos on the front page, there was actually a guy employed. He chose the videos on YouTube that was going to go on that front page. It was one guy. In the entire YouTube, there was one man who chose what what everybody was going to see when they got to the
Powerful
YouTube.
man in the world.
Seriously, and his job, of course, was replaced by an algorithm, right? But now, even YouTube, they all work the same way. Exactly what you're saying, the algorithm. I went onto YouTube. Somebody recommended some video, it was some conspiracy video about 9/11, and he says, "You're gonna love this conspiracy. I mean, you're gonna think it's ridiculous, but you're gonna love the thought process behind this conspiracy theory. So go and take a look at this one." And I went and I watched this. I don't know, it's an hour documentary, a half-hour documentary, whatever it was. I watched it, and then suddenly, YouTube is throwing all these conspiracies at me. And every time I go to YouTube, half my YouTube recommendations are conspiracies about all sorts of weird things, and I'm like, really? Like, I'm not really interested in watching this YouTube, but there they are, right?
Now, what if you bought into it? Look what you just did. If you weren't who you are, you would have been radicalized by that.
Seriously.
Thank you, YouTube.
Yeah. So is that how radicalization actually happens, by the way?
That's a huge part.
Really?
That's like, it's one of the most critical parts. Yeah.
Wow. You would never think that would be a major part of it. You figure when you think about
Right.
radicalization, you
Overlook it.
figure, oh, my friend is a Ku Klux Klan member, so he's going to invite me into the Ku Klux Klan, kind of like the Freemasons, right? Come and join the Ku Klux Klan, and that's how I'd get into it.
That's part of it. But now, let's say you have a bunch of friends who are in the KKK and you're on Facebook. They recommend friends and contacts for you now.
Wow,
So now they just put together your own KKK club.
amazing, amazing. So I hope that that the American government is successful in deregulating or changing the regulations for these companies, because I think it's time.
Yeah.
I think it's time they're held accountable for what they're doing.
Yeah, and they do it for profit, by the way. I'm convinced that someone's had to have told them at some point that this is like a key part of the radicalization process. They don't care. They don't care. They make too much money off of this.
Right, of course. You and me are the product.
Yes.
They give us their site for free, but you and me are the product. Amazing, amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. Ryan, thank you. That hour went by pretty quick.
It did. It did. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. And I don't have you on half as much as I should, and it's just laziness on my part. So I'm going to invite you back, and I hope that you'll agree to come back, and we can do this again, and follow maybe in a week or two we'll do this again and see how things have changed in the states.
I'm sure there'll be enough bloodshed to warrant another
Yeah,
appearance.
as we get closer to the inauguration, see how much death and destruction has happened across the states. I hate to sound morbid, but I mean, unfortunately, there's a serious chance of that happening, and that's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to take a little break. When we come back, Sheldon Eric Freed will be joining me right here on the Howie Silbiger Show on the True Talk Radio Network. Thank you, Ryan, for being here, and we'll take a little break. We'll be right back.